When we think of grandmothers, the older generation, we often think of sweet little old ladies who are mature and wise. Sometimes the connotation of grandmother comes to mind of a motherly matriarch who rocks back and forth in their rocking chair whilst knitting woolen goodies for their grandchildren. Grandmothers are also often associated with the giver of goodies, like cakes and sweets. But you wouldn't ever really think of a grandmother as a criminal and a lawbreaker. Here are 4 different stories of grandmothers who broke the law by smuggling drugs and the subsequent consequences they found themselves in afterwards. Workmen had arrived on the M45 motorway westbound near Byfield, Northamptonshire, to start work on the motorway. Suddenly, they noticed something on the grass verge, and on closer inspection, discovered it was the body of a woman lying face down. She was deceased. The authorities were called, and the body was taken to the morgue at Leicester Royal Infirmary, where the body was examined by forensic pathologist Professor Guy Rutty. The post-mortem revealed 10 packages of the drug cocaine in the woman's stomach, meaning that she had swallowed the packages in order to smuggle the drugs. The woman was determined to be between the ages of 50 and 65 and had no identification or documents on her or family pictures. She was of Afro-Caribbean descent, and it was said to be clear that she had had a tough, hard life. Police determined that the woman may have landed at Birmingham Airport and that she had links to the Midlands. It was also determined that although the body of the woman had been found on the Wednesday, that she most likely died 2 days prior to being found on Monday the 8th of April 2002, and that after dying en route to her destination after her flight, after becoming unwell, those that had collected her from the airport may have been the ones to then dump her body on the side of the motorway. The woman was described as being 5'3" with black hair that had a ginger tint to it. It was greying at the front and her hair had been braided at the back. She had a prominent mole between her upper lip and her nose, a scar that ran along her left eyebrow, 2 very old scars on her jaw, and scars on the inside of both arms. The post-mortem showed that she was a mother, and she had a surgical scar across her abdomen. The woman was wearing an orange floral top with a black and pink skirt and black leather moccasin shoes. She was also wearing a polo shirt. Toxicology tests show that she wasn't a drugs user, although she was a drugs mule. Due to the woman having no identification on her, appeals complete with an e-fit of the deceased woman were released to the public, but no success to identifying who the woman was. The woman was placed on the Police UK Missing Persons Unit database, as police believe that the woman had flown into the UK from Kingston, Jamaica, as during the post-mortem, high levels of cadmium, which is a battery component, was found in her bones, and there is a large battery factory in Kingston, Jamaica, known as Tropical Battery. Despite numerous appeals to the public over the years, the identity of the drugs mule woman found dead on a motorway grass verge has never been identified. No one has ever come forward to identify her or reported her missing, and who she was still remains a mystery 21 years later. Susan Clark, a mother of 3 children named Neil, Katie and Laura, from Chatham in Kent, and a grandmother of 8. She was also a great-grandmother of 1. Susan was said to have been a big Coronation Street fan, which is a popular British soap on TV, and she also took part in amateur dramatic classes. Susan had been married to her first husband, John Smethers, who was an actor, and they'd been together for 25 years and married for 19 of those before splitting up. Susan had stayed in the marital home in Cheadle, Cheshire, to look after the 3 children after the divorce. By then, the kids had become teenagers. Susan had worked as a secretary for a holiday airline company called Air 2000, now known as First Choice Holidays. At some point after the separation from her husband, Susan was said to have met and become very smitten with a man called Roger. It was then that she abandoned her teenage children and moved into a 1-bed flat in Whitfield with Roger. They then moved together to Dorking, Surrey, where they were said to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, but causing Susan's children to cut all ties with her as they felt that she had abandoned them. It was said that close friends and family often wondered where the couple got their money from, as they often enjoyed multiple tropical and exotic cruises costing £3,000 per head, and they had been on 6 cruises in 2 years, totalling £18,000. All this was while living off Roger's pension of £885 a month after rent. Susan and her new husband eventually moved abroad to the resort of Gardamar del Segura, south of Alicante, and lived in a whitewashed 3-bed luxury villa with a roof terraced, worth over £200,000. The locals did not like Roger and described him as full of himself, abrupt and very rude to staff, and he also had bad manners. They also described him as loud and a complete know-it-all with a tendency to exaggerate and full of himself. Plumber Paul Craven said,
"If you'd done something, you could bet your bottom dollar Roger had also done it. But he'd done it bigger and better."
Roger was nicknamed Mr. Bullshitter, as Roger claimed to have been a doctor, a pilot, a paramedic, a prison officer, a 5-star Michelin chef, and a restaurant owner, owning 2 eateries in Benidorm. He also claimed to be a member of the SAS, depending on who he was talking to. In 2018, Susan and Roger went on another luxury cruise to the Bahamas and around the Caribbean. From there, the ship, the Marco Polo liner, would sail back from the Bahamas to Tilbury in Essex, making a stop in Lisbon before reaching Essex. During the cruise, fellow passengers said that Roger pulled out wads of cash anytime any transaction was involved, and he told people that he ran a business importing pineapples from the Caribbean to the UK. Fellow passengers noted that the couple never ever really posed for pictures during the cruise. The ship docked in St. Lucia, where Roger got off, but Susan stayed on the ship. Upon his return, Roger boarded the boat with 4 new suitcases and showed them off to his fellow passengers, bragging about how they were sold in Harrods and worth around £1,500 each, but he'd only paid £400 for the lot. He then gave his old suitcase that he came on the cruise with to a cabin boy. This caused the cabin crew to gossip amongst each other about how they'd never seen anyone swap suitcases mid-journey, which raised their suspicions enough for the British National Crime Agency to be informed of the couple's suspicious behaviour. And the British National Crime Agency tipped off the Portuguese authorities, where the ship was due to dock next. On the 4th of December 2018, plainclothes officers from the Portuguese Serious Crime Unit boarded the boat. Upon a search of the couple's cabin, they found suitcases with false bottoms, and concealed within the false bottoms of the suitcases, there they found 9 kilograms of cocaine with a street value of 2 million, and the couple were arrested. A 2018 diary seized from the couple's crew's bedside detailed their extravagant trips. It also revealed that they were planning a £4,000 a head 16-day trip flying to Havana, Cuba, and then a cruise to Philipsburg, St. Martin, St. John, Antigua and Barbados, Funchal, Madeira, Malaga and Alicante. But they were arrested before this could happen. Susan and Roger claimed that they'd been conned into carrying the drugs by crooks and that they thought they were smuggling exotic fruit. The couple claimed that the real culprit was a Jamaican businessman called Lee, but they could not provide any contact information for the so-called Jamaican businessman, nor could they seem to provide any form of details or information that would identify him. The couple were put on a one-day trial in front of 3 judges, where prosecutors said that the couple were drugs mules who had used 4 cruises over 2 years as a front for their smuggling, which had netted them £26,500 per trip. The judge dismissed their claim of a Jamaican businessman called Lee, stating that their story was not credible and that they were fully aware they were smuggling cocaine and had only accepted to do it because of the high profits. Susan and Roger held hands and cried in court as the judge sentenced them to 8 years each in prison, at which point Roger whispered to Susan,
Jesus, I was not expecting that. I wasn't expecting more than 4 years. I'll be 80 when this is all over.
And as the couple were being led off to jail, Roger cried out that he wanted people to know the real story. Susan claimed that she and Roger were completely innocent and that she had been ignored by the Foreign Office. She was sent to EP Tyres prison, a 100-year-old crumbling building with a tin roof, where she shared a 10 by 10 rat-infested cell with 3 other women. The prison is home to 400 serious offenders, including murderers. 6 months after being sentenced, Susan complained that she'd lost 2.5 stone and feared that at her age she wouldn't make it out of prison alive, and that she was scared she would be coming out of prison in a box. She claimed that her health was terrible and she'd been handed a death sentence. She also claimed that then British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has not helped them. She said that it was torture being away from her husband Roger. Susan also wrote letters to friends saying how hard it was in prison, especially because of the language barrier, and how she was locked in a cell with 4 women, only one of whom spoke English. She also complained that her cell was very cold and there was no heating at all. She claimed that the prison gave her only 1 hot drink a day with breakfast, and for the rest of the day there was only water. In the prison, women are put to work making clothes, carpets and other items. They are also given lessons in home economics, languages and maternal care. Susan was allowed out of her cell for 2 hours a day onto a concrete yard, which she described as very bleak. Roger also complained of harsh prison conditions, saying he'd lost 6 stones and had had a suspected heart attack. A British couple that had lived near to Susan and Roger in Spain told a British tabloid that they'd been offered a free, all expenses paid holiday to the Caribbean by Susan and Roger, and were told that in order for the free holiday, they'd have to carry some suitcases back for them, which were sold in Harrods for £1,500, but they'd be getting them for £500. At first, the couple were very excited and grateful for the holiday, until they were told that upon receiving their suitcases, they'd have to then transfer their clothes into the new suitcases. They felt confused by this because they thought, wow, if these suitcases are to be sold for 1,500, why would anybody want to buy second-hand suitcases after we've put our clothes in them? And after a quick internet search, they realised that the suitcases were not sold in Harrods. So they then turned down the offer of a free holiday because they said the offer seemed dodgy. And after turning down the offer, the couple noted that Susan and Roger then distanced themselves from them. And the wife, who used to work as a cleaner on the island and also cleaned Susan and Roger's villa, said that she was sacked not long after. The couple also noted that Susan and Roger hardly had any furniture in their villa, stating that the house was practically empty, and it was suspected that this may have been because they were expecting to flee at any day. The couple now count themselves as having had a lucky escape and are angry that the couple they thought were their friends would try to set them up like that.
I want to go home. I want to go back to the UK. I just want to be with Roger. That, out of everything, I think that is the worst thing, the worst torture, having to be apart from him. And I find it very hard not knowing day to day how he is, how he's coping. We're both determined to stay strong for each other because it's the only way we're going to get through this. But sometimes it's really, really hard. And to be cut off from our family is really hard.
But behind the demeanour of the sweet, old, innocent lady duped into drug smuggling, a truth began to emerge in the press. Because this was not the first time that Susan and Roger had been caught and imprisoned for smuggling Class A drugs. In 2010, whilst driving in Roger's Nissan car in Oslo, Norway, in Europe, the couple's car was stopped when sniffer dogs smelt drugs in the car. Upon search of the vehicle, 240 kilograms of cannabis was discovered hidden in the car, and the couple were arrested. It was soon discovered that Susan and Roger had made 16 drug smuggling trips to Norway in Roger's Nissan car between 2003 and 2004, netting them £33,000. The couple were bailed in Norway to appear soon after in court for their crime, but instead they skipped bail and fled the country, changing their last name from Button to Clark to avoid detection, and then they went into hiding. But they were caught a year later in 2011 when Roger became chairman of the Residents Association and had his picture published in a newspaper where he was recognised and subsequently extradited back to Norway to face up to their crimes. Roger was jailed for 5 years, while Susan was given 4 years, serving her final 12 months back in England in Holloway Prison in North London. They told friends that they were caught smuggling cigarettes instead of drugs. After serving their prison sentence for the first drug smuggling offence, they returned back to the UK and moved into a retirement complex in Orpington, Kent, before immigrating to Spain, where they moved into the 3-bed villa in Gardemar. The couple ran a bar-restaurant when they relocated, but soon ran into serious financial trouble when they struggled to pay their suppliers. Despite their financial struggles, they were both members of a golf society, and Susan, a lady of leisure. Not long after this, they made their ill-fated trip on the Caribbean cruise. It was revealed that the couple's 3-bed luxury villa was not theirs. It was rented on a long lease from a Chinese restaurant owner. And despite talks of all his achievements and the bragging about the multiple fabulous, amazing careers Roger told everyone, he was really a truck driver from London. And no marriage certificate could be found, or any record of any marriage, despite the couple calling themselves husband and wife. In 2020, the couple's appeal was rejected, and there was even more dire news to come, because Susan found a lump in her breast. Portuguese doctors said that there was nothing they could do for her, as the cancer in her breast was too far advanced, so they stopped treatment. As Susan's condition worsened, she developed a lump in her throat and became unable to speak. Susan had been due to return to England to finish her jail term in a British prison, but due to her failing health, she wasn't well enough to make the journey. Because of her failing condition, Susan was granted a final visit from her husband Roger, now aged 73, and also in jail, and the visit was through a perspex window for a final goodbye. On the 10th of October 2021, just over 2 years into her sentence, Susan's worst fear came true, when at the age of 72, she died alone and in agony in her prison cell of breast cancer, with no one around her in her final hours. The man she called her husband, Roger, was transferred to England to HMP Highdown in Surrey to serve out the last 6 months of his sentence. He is due for parole in May 2023. On Good Friday 2008, a specially adapted Nissan Pathfinder was stopped by custom officers as it embarked from a ferry at Dover, coming in from France. The car was a mobility car and it belonged to 77-year-old Ambrosine Heron from Smethwick in the West Midlands. The 77-year-old suffered from a number of medical ailments, including diabetes, asthma, high blood pressure, and arthritis, and she was cared for by her daughter, Paulette Chambers, a 49-year-old mother of 3, who was also in the car when it was stopped, along with taxi driver, 47-year-old Edmund Anderson, who was driving the vehicle. The reason why the mobility car had been stopped was because custom officers had become suspicious by the high number of trips that the grandmother had been making in her car across the channel. She had made 14 journeys in 6 months. So the car was stopped and then questioned, where they told customs that they'd been to France to visit relatives. But a quick investigation by customs showed that the mobility car had gone through France and stopped in Amsterdam. Due to their suspicions, custom officials brought in sniffer dogs, where the 2 dogs sniffed out 16 kilograms of uncut cocaine hidden in tins of palm oil at the back of the specially adapted mobility car. The cocaine was said to have a street value of £1 million, and all 3 were arrested. 77-year-old grandmother Ambrosine Heron's excuse was,
"I don't know anything about that. I just went with my daughter. I didn't ask any questions because I'm not a nosy person. I don't smoke or drink. What am I doing with drugs?"
Ambrosine Heron, who was born in Jamaica in 1949 and had never been in trouble with police before, walked with a stick. 2 years prior, in 2006, she'd suffered a stroke and was now on a number of daily medications for her health conditions. At Canterbury Crown Court in September 2008, It was revealed that the 77-year-old grandmother and her 49-year-old daughter Paulette had conned taxi driver Edmund Anderson into driving the pair on their drugs run. 77-year-old Ambrosine Heron tried to lie her way out of any involvement by saying that her daughter was having an affair with the taxi driver, implying that both her daughter and the taxi driver were both in on it, and she was the unsuspecting, innocent one in all of this. But the judge saw through this lie and acquitted the taxi driver of all charges. It was also revealed that £90,000 in cash had been deposited into daughter Paulette's bank account since the first suspected drugs run, and it was believed that when they had told customs they had gone to France to visit relatives but had only passed through France on their way to Amsterdam, they had collected the drugs there. The judge Adele Williams said that 77-year-old Ambrosine Heron was a willing participant, saying, "I have no doubt that your role in the car was to add some respectability to the journey in respect of your age and ill health." And on the 26th of September 2008, 77-year-old Ambrosine Heron and her 49-year-old daughter Paulette Chambers was convicted, and the next month, on the 6th of October 2008, Ambrosine Heron was jailed for 13 years. Her daughter Paulette was given 14 years in prison. In January 2009, Ambrosine Heron appealed her sentence on the grounds that her age, health issues, and subsequent lifespan was not taken into consideration when she was sentenced. Her appeal was successful, and her sentence was then reduced from 13 years to 10 years. "65-year-old Lindsay Sandeford, born on June the 25th, 1956, was a mother of 2 sons from Gloucestershire, England, and a grandmother of 2. She was also a legal secretary working for legal firm DTS Legal in Cheltenham. In 2012, she decided to move from Gloucestershire to India. On the 19th of May 2012, Lindsay was arrested at Bali's Ngurah Rai International Airport, coming off of a Thai Airways flight arriving from Bangkok. She had been caught trying to smuggle 10.6 pounds of cocaine with a street value of 1.6 million. Lindsay claimed that she had been forced into smuggling the drugs by a gang that had threatened to harm her and her family if she didn't. But upon hearing that the maximum penalty for drug smuggling in Bali was death by firing squad, she changed her story and started cooperating with authorities and became a police informant in hope for a lighter sentence. Lindsay Sandeford admitted that 2 days prior to being caught, she'd collected a suitcase that had cocaine hidden in it. She gave up the ringleader of the illegal enterprise as antiques dealer, 50-year-old Julian Ponder, originally from Brighton, as the man who had lured her into smuggling the drugs. Julian Ponder was then arrested at his home in Bali, alongside his girlfriend, Rachel Dougal, and fellow Brit, Paul Beals, who was also involved. Lindsay Sandeford was taken to Kero Bokan prison, one of Indonesia's most toughest prisons, which holds 1,000 inmates, to await her trial. The prison is described as a hellhole with frequent murders inside. There are also frequent rapes, drug overdoses and fights. There are a high number of inmates that are HIV positive and very sexually aggressive lesbians. The prisoners are fed gruel, one bowl a day, unless they have family from the outside that brings food in for them. During Lindsay's court trial on the 22nd of January 2013, the prosecution asked for 15 years in jail, but was shocked when the judge, Amsa Simran Juntak, sentenced her to death by firing squad. The judge said that there was no mitigating circumstances to allow for leniency, and that Lindsay had undermined Indonesia's hardline stance on drugs. Lindsay Sandeford was led from the court in a distressed state and declined to talk to journalists. Julian Ponder, the man who was the mastermind behind it all and had been the one to coax Lindsay into smuggling drugs for him, was said to have paid £1 million in bribes to get his trafficking charges dropped, as well as the charges of the other two. But it was said he was angry at being informed on by Lindsay, as a sting operation had been set up to catch him out, involving Lindsay. He was said to have been angry at this and decided that he was not going to pay any money towards any bribes for her, allegedly. Julian Ponder's charges were dropped and he was cleared of smuggling and convicted of the lesser charge of possession of cocaine, to which he received 6 years in prison. His girlfriend Rachel received 1 year in prison for failing to report a crime and was said to be desperate to get back home to her daughter in England. And Paul Beals, who was also involved in the drug smuggling enterprise, received 4 years. On the 31st of January 2013, the UK government made its decision not to fund a lawyer to help Lindsay in her appeal against the death sentence, stating that it didn't believe that there was any hope of the appeal being successful. And on the 8th of April 2013, Lindsay lost her appeal against her death sentence in the Indonesian High Courts, with the judge agreeing with the original verdict, saying the sentence was accurate and correct. Undeterred, Lindsay Sandeford lodged a second appeal on the 30th of August 2013, just over 4 months later, using the fact that due to her history of mental health, she was vulnerable and easy to manipulate. But that appeal was also rejected, meaning that Lindsay Sandeford would die by firing squad. The procedure for this type of death is that the prisoners are taken to an island. They are then given the option to sit or stand, after which armed officers take their shot, aiming for the heart. If the prisoner survives the shot, the commander then shoots them in the head to put an end to the prisoner's life. Lindsay has now been on death row in a Bali prison for over a decade, just waiting for the day to come when she will be executed by firing squad. The day or time of that execution is unknown, but it is believed to be very near, as the new governor has decided to speed up all executions after they had been halted for a while due to the Bali government saying that they did not have the funds at that time to execute any prisoners for now. Lindsay now knits various items whilst in prison, which she sells to try and raise funds for her legal fees. She's also said to be now suffering from arthritis. She had been imprisoned with fellow inmate Heather Mack, who bludgeoned her mother Sheila von Weiss Mack to death, together with her boyfriend Tommy Schaefer, and then stuffed her mother's mutilated body in a suitcase in Bali in 2015. Heather Mack said that Lindsay spends all day in her cell and doesn't really mix with anyone. In terms of her impeding death by firing squad, 66-year-old grandmother Lindsay Sandeford said, "It won't be hard for me to face anymore. It's not a particular death I would choose, but then again, I wouldn't choose dying in agony from cancer either." The 66-year-old grandmother also said that she feels blessed to have been able to watch her 2 sons grow up, and also that she was able to meet her 2 grandchildren who she met behind bars for the first time. Lindsay states that a lot of people don't get that in their lifetime. She met her granddaughter, 2-year-old Isla, for the first time in September 2015, as it was believed then that her execution day was very soon, so the whole family flew over to Bali for a final goodbye. Of her 2-year-old granddaughter Isla, Lindsay said, "I'm so glad I had the chance to meet her. Isla is the most important thing in my life, and no one can take this away from me now. She's an absolute delight. She's the sweetest baby I've ever met." Isla was born 7 months after her grandmother was arrested. Hibiscus, a charity that tackles the issue of drugs mules, says there's been a 40% dramatic rise in women in their 60s and 70s becoming drug mules. They say that these older women are more naive and less educated about the consequences of smuggling drugs than younger people.